What's up, Wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG. That's right, the Dev from SBMTG. It's amazing, right? But anyway, we're close. We're close to the end of these Adventures in the Forgotten Realm spoilers. There's only one more day of preview cards after today, and honestly, over the weekend, I was trying to crunch some numbers, and it looked like there were already 15 Mythics spoiled and 30 plus rares, so I really didn't think there were going to be a whole lot of more, like, hype cards left to look at, but I was very wrong about that. We got a lot of really good upper rarity cards today, so thank you, Wizards, saving some actual good stuff the last couple of days of spoiler season. But if we're going to talk about it, we got to talk about it, so let's go. We did get some interesting lower rarity stuff as usual, and this time, some of it really looks playable. Like, we'll start with the cycle of color hosing stuff like Burning Hands. This is just 1 and a red for an instant that deals 2 damage to a creature or a planeswalker. But if the permanent is green, Burning Hands deals 6 damage instead, so good way for red decks to kill those Lovestruck Beasts and Vorinclexes and whatnot once it gets into its sideboard. There's also Divine Smite. I like the name of this card. It's just 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls phases out. If that permanent's black, just exile it instead. 2 mana to exile that, like, Professor Onyx or something. Sounds pretty D's. Like, that's the mark that I think they're trying to hit here, is a card that's fine to play in the main deck, but gets really good when you're playing against the right color. And again, I think they hit that mark better with Burning Hands than they did with Divine Smite, or Ray of Enfeeblement for that matter. This is just a 1 black mana for an instant. A creature gets -4/-1 until end of turn, unless it's white. Now, if it's white, it gets -4/-4 till end of turn. So you get a 1 mana Grasp of Darkness if the creature's white, which is actually really sweet against Seasoned Hallowblade and Selfless Savior and all that. So I do like this card, but again, looks mostly like a sideboard card. That said, you know, even if it didn't have the extra text on it, you could kill Seasoned Hallowblades and stuff with it. So it might actually be a little better than I think. Like, if you're playing against green, this kills Edgewall Innkeeper. If you're playing against red, it kills Fervent Champion, a bunch of other stuff. So, like, maybe it's a little bit better main deck than I think if you're not playing against the color that it's good against, but still, not amazing, obviously, but incredible when you come up against those white aggro decks. As far as some other cool uncommons went, we got to see White Dragon, 6 mana for a 4/4 dragon with flying, and it has Cold Breath. When it ETBs, you tap a creature an opponent controls, and you freeze it down, which is normally a blue ability, but I guess I just needed to make a super tapper in white. You know, again, these all look at least somewhat decent and limited, where they're fairly high statted flyers that do a thing when they ETB most of the time, so you'll play them there, but just about nowhere else, and I think that might be the last time I have to say that this season. We also saw this sweet little card called Wild Shape that I'm probably going to talk more about than I should. This is just a single green mana for an instant where you choose 1. Until end of turn, target creature you control has that base power and toughness, becomes that creature type, and gains that ability. So let's look at these. Mode 1, a 1/3 turtle with hexproof. Mode 2, a 1/5 spider with reach, and Mode 3, a 3/3 elephant with trample. Really sweet looking card for just 1 mana. You get something that's not as good as like a Snakeskin Veil or Blossoming Defense or something, but it still protects your creature from a removal spell for just 1 mana. Now, your creature might get through for less combat damage if this happens in combat or something, but often you don't mind if you keep your guy. Maybe you target a Stonecoil Serpent, a Stonecoil Steve Austin, and not only do you give it hexproof, but you also give it +1/+3 in that situation, and it works that way with a lot of creatures that have counters. Keep that in mind. But on Mode 2, a 1/5 spider with reach, you get to block flyers and probably still survive, and you really get to block like a whole lot of different creatures regardless of whether or not they fly, because this mode makes your butt huge. But aside from that, Mode 3, 3/3 elephant with trample. So again, Stonecoil Steve Austin, baby. If it's like a giant growth that's better. It gives a Stonecoil +3/+3 in trample for a single mana. That's great. But it's going to do that with a whole bunch of your creatures, whether you're making your, smaller dorks like a little bit bigger so they can attack in, or maybe you swung in with your Alyssum Caryatid, your opponent blocked it and they thought it was safe, so you just turn it into a 3/3 elephant with trample or something and trade or just blow them out. So there's just so many cool things you can do with this card for just a single mana, whether it's a combat trick that either trades or blows out your opponent, or just gets through more damage, makes the creature trample. Sometimes you'll just give a creature with a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it trample with the 3rd ability and get through for a whole bunch of damage, right? It's a decent thing on blocks if you are on defense. It's good whether you're behind, pretty good whether you're ahead. It really wants you to have creatures out, which is the only bad thing about it. But hey, it's a green card. It doesn't do anything if you don't have a board, but drawing it after a board wipe is going to kind of suck. But aside from that, there's a lot of really cool stuff about this card, and it does stuff at all different points in the game. Wouldn't want to miss this common from today. It's Eyes of the Beholder. Get it? Eyes of the Beholder. It's a cute little pun here that costs 6 mana for an instant. Target creature gets -11/-11 until end of turn. So I guess this can kill like a Ulamog or something, but it costs 6 mana. We also got Rust Monster today. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/1 beast with first strike. You can sack an artifact to give it +2/+0 till end of turn. So if you want to play ATOG in Standard, this is the length you have to go to. But the good, possibly playable and common train continues for now with Check for Traps. This is just a black and a generic for a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, exile that card. If an instant card or a card with flash was exiled this way, they lose 1 life. Otherwise, you lose 1 life. So after rotation, I think this is probably just going to be like a better version of Agonizing Remorse. And yeah, we lose Agonizing Remorse to rotation, but, you know, it lives on in this card in a way. This still exiles, but it can hit graveyards. Thing is, it might not be as important to hit graveyards after Escape is out of the format. So that's not so bad. And this is really sweet at getting, like, counter spells out of your opponent's hand and hitting them for a little bit of damage at the same time, which I do like. Now, last uncommon of the day here, but I think maybe the most relevant, and I'm serious. This is Monk of the Open Hand. Just a white mana for a 1/1 elf monk with Flurry of Blows. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Monk of the Open Hand. Now, to be honest, there are some things I don't like about the card, and I'll start with those, right? You want to play this on turn 1, and then you want to follow up with, like, Clarion Spirit on turn 2, but then you don't get to grow this on turn 2. Which kind of sucks, right? On turn 3, you'll end up getting a 2/2 and then a 1/1 flying guy. You'll put a counter on this and get a 1/1 flying guy. That's how you get to 2/2, in case you're wondering. But in any case, this does look good the more the game goes on. You know, a 1-drop that ends up by, you know, turn 4 possibly being at least a 3/3 is not bad. It's really not too bad, right? If you go this on turn 1 plus like 2 1-drops on 2, swing 2, plus you got a couple of like little weenie dudes out up to block and that can get in damage next turn, like things are starting to look really good. And obviously with things like Showdown of the Scalds and any other card draw effects that can get you deeper into your aggro deck, this can be a decent card a good ways through the game. It's not a great top deck, that kind of sucks, right? But with all these like adventure creatures that we have in Standard, with all of these, you know, learn cards that we have in Standard like Professor of Symbology, it's really not too hard to double spell on a turn that you started with no cards in your hand. Right, so I think this is probably going to be at least pretty decent. Again, if it grows to a 3/3 or, God forbid, like a 4/4 or a 5/5, this thing is going to get out of control pretty easily. And I like that it gets you a little bit of value for going slightly deeper into the game in these decks. You know, these Clarion Spirit decks, these Lumamancer decks and whatnot, like the Mono White Magecraft decks, they don't want to go very deep into a game whatsoever, but this card is actually going to reward you for going a little bit deeper into the game than you thought you would by becoming a 5/5 or a 6/6 or something. So just a sweet little card that I do think is going to affect the Standard format in a couple of different decks. But let's move on to what you come to see, and that's the rares and mythics. We got to finally see Hand and Eye of Vecna today. Hand of Vecna is a 3-mana legendary equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, equipped creature or a creature you control named Vecna gets +X/+X till end of turn. X is the number of cards in your hand. Equip, pay 1 life for each card in your hand, and you can equip 2. And then Eye of Vecna is 2 mana for a legendary artifact. When it ETBs, you draw a card, you lose 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2. If you do, you draw a card and you lose 2 life. This, I like a little bit more. I don't like the losing 2 life, but I do like drawing a card. I do like this being kind of a bizarro world golden egg in some ways, you know. But the ability to keep paying mana during your upkeep and draw cards is pretty good. Like when Mazemind Tome leaves the format, this is also the Bizarro Mazemind Tome, you know. You pay 2, draw a card, but instead you lose life rather than eventually gaining 4, right? The cards could go somewhat well together in the right deck, but I'm not sure that this is going to see a whole heck of a lot of play while Tome is still in the format. That said, if there are decks that need some card draw, but they don't play blue or any other, you know, efficient card draw spells, this could do it for them. It's obviously going to come at a price, and you have to decide whether or not you want to draw the card before you actually draw your card for the turn. So there's a lot of like problems with this, but you know, there's a lot of decks that are hard up for card advantage, and they'll do whatever it takes, and this is not actually a bad way of getting that card advantage. We also saw True Polymorph today. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for an instant. Target artifact or creature becomes a copy of another target artifact. or creatures. So if you wanted to, you just go off all day on this card. Just talk about all the stuff it can do. But obviously it's a pretty powerful card. The only issue is that it costs 6 mana. And I'm not sure that's good enough for standard, but I'm also pretty sure that a lot of people are going to try. Right. I wish that this could copy a thing and like discard the legendary clause like we see sometimes. Then it'd be really good in Orvar decks and stuff. As it stands, 6 mana is a lot. So this is probably just a commander card. But in commander, it can copy, you know, giant, ridiculous artifacts so long as they're not legendary. And there's probably something there. Now, we knew coming into this week that we hadn't seen the green creature land yet. We were all speculating on what it does and how powerful it would be and why did they wait to show it to us last and all that. Turns out it's just normal in the way that all of these are somewhat playable. I don't think it's the absolute best. I don't think it's the worst, but I do think that it's relatively high up there in the hierarchy. Nest of the Hydra is the name of this one. It's a land. If you control 2 or more other lands, Nest of the Hydra enters the battlefield tapped, so you want to play this early. You can tap it to add a green. You can pay X and a green to have Nest become an XX green Hydra creature till end of turn. It's still a land, and X can't be 0. So I've heard a lot of people say that like Crawling Barrens is better than this, but I don't think that's like 100% correct. First of all, Crawling Barrens can't become a 1/1, a 2/2, or a 3/3. You know, for less mana than it activates for. Well, at least it becomes a 2/2 for less mana than you can activate a Crawling Barrens for. So there's that. Plus, Crawling Barrens does not tap for a color of mana. It just taps for colorless. So I think that this is instantly, in a lot of ways, just better than Crawling Barrens. Mostly just because it can tap for a green, where Crawling Barrens can't. So, you know, in a deck that's looking to play Castle Garenbrig, and maybe even Faceless Haven, you have to play a bunch of forests, right? You can still fit this card where you might not be able to fit a Crawling Barrens or a Faceless Haven for that matter. So it matters in a format where we're trying to play castles, where we're trying to play like other non-basic lands that aren't necessarily creature lands or anything. We only have like one slot for a colorless land in our deck a lot of the time, if we have any. So I think that in that way, this is probably a better card than Barrens, but I don't think Barrens is really the big comparison. Really, we're comparing it to all the other creature lands we've seen so far, and this is probably not the best one. I think that the black creature land is probably my favorite, but this is at least pretty decent in terms of rate. And if you do have, you know, a billion mana and not much else is going on, just throw it all into your land and hopefully kill your opponent. Let's take a look at Long Rest next. This is 3 green mana and X for a sorcery. Return X target cards with different mana values from your graveyard to your hand. If 8 or more cards return to your hand this way, your life total becomes your starting life total. Exile Long Rest. So that is an interesting card if nothing else. It really reminds me of like Seasons Past from a couple of seasons past. It's like a tier 3 deck for a while. This, though, is so many hoops, you know? You have to have, like, 11 mana to pop it off the way you want it to and actually, like, gain the life. But gaining the life is not that big of a deal. It's really not. But if you do want to gain the life, it takes 11 mana and 8 different mana values in your graveyard. Now, it's a little bit easy to do this, easier than you think. Because, you know, a land, like a Fabled Passage, counts as 0. So really you have to have like 0 to 7 instead of 1 to 8. But it's still tough. It's still super hard. Even if you're milling yourself all game, it can be tough to get to that. But I think where this really shines is just the ability to, for 5 mana, return 2 cards to your hand. For 6 mana, return 3 cards to your hand. Even for 7 mana, returning 4 cards to your hand in the late game is going to be the refill that will end the game a lot of the time if you're a control deck. So I like this, but is it as good as some of the other stuff we already have? You know, like, would you rather just cast, I don't know, like Harness Infinity or Eerie Ultimatum or something like that? I'm just, like, not super sure how great the card is, but like a lot of cards, if you have enough mana in the late game to spend on it, it wins you the game. It turns out, though, I think there are a lot of cards that do that better and more efficiently than this. So we'll move on to what is actually like low-key one of my favorite cards in the set, and that's Skeletal Swarming. It is 5 mana, 3 a black and a green for an enchantment. Each skeleton you control has trample, attacks each combat if able, and gets +X/+O, where X is the number of skeletons you control. At the beginning of your end step, create a tapped 1/1 black skeleton creature token. If a creature died this turn, you create 2 of those tokens instead, which means that they'll swing for 4 mana on the next turn, even if you started with, you know, just one creature in play and you killed it or it died or village rights or whatever. So just a sweet little card. You always get at least 1 skeleton at the end of every turn. So look at this as like a bad Outlaw's Merriment, I guess, in that way. But, you know, it's not terrible. It's really not so bad. 5 mana is an awful lot, but if you can take control of the board state. Maybe you've got a bunch of sweepers, Culling Ritual, Extinction Event, Shadow's Verdict, whatever you're trying to do. Maybe you've got a bunch of different board sweeping effects in your deck, and all you're really trying to do is clear the board state as much as possible so that you can start this thing rolling. Because once it's gotten a couple of turns without a skeleton dying or a skeleton having to like run his head into a 5/5, because they have to attack every turn. Once you've gotten a couple of turns on a basically an open board, the card easily takes over the game. I mean, it's going to make a skeleton one turn, a skeleton the next. Your opponent's going to feel forced to kill at least one of the skeletons, at which point you get two skeletons. Then if the opponent wipes the board, guess what? You get two skeletons, or you get one skeleton, because they probably wipe the board on their turn. So I think it's kind of a neat card to sort of keep the pressure on, and it works with more than you think. We don't have a whole lot of really good like tribal skeletons in Standard right now, or barely any for that matter. But what we do have is changelings. You know, we got 2-drop changelings, 3-drop changelings, 4-drop changelings. So maybe what you want to do is play a changeling every turn on curve or something, and then drop this on turn 5, and suddenly they all get huge. You know, they all get trampled, they all get like +3/+0 or something like that. They just swing in, and maybe you can drop this card on turn 5 and just win the game, like immediately. Maybe it does something to turn it enters the battlefield besides just make a 1/1. Because, you know, 5 mana for a 1/1 isn't great the turn that you play this. But, there's a lot of like 5 mana do-nothing enchantments that I'm really excited to play. So at least this does something. I think it's a really sweet card that probably is good in like skeleton commander decks, although I don't know what skeleton is your commander in that case. I really don't, but still. I guess the skeleton doesn't have to be your commander. You're just trying to like make this card work somehow with your commander. And there's probably a ton of commanders that can do that. This obviously works pretty well with Maskwood Nexus in Standard too, but do I want to pay 4 mana to do nothing on turn 4 and then pay 5 mana to make a 1/1 on the next turn? Like, no, I don't think it's super powerful, but I do think in the right shell, maybe a control build of some kind, this is just a reliable creature factory. It's like a planeswalker. It makes a creature every single turn. But yeah, it's a reliable creature factory in some control builds, and that's the kind of the way I want to play this one. But we got nothing but mythics left, dog. Here we go with the red mythic dragon. This is Inferno of the Star Mounts. I've had a couple of people in my comments section who have been really excited to see this dragon all season. It's just 6 mana, only 6 mana. 4 and 2 red for a 6/5, or excuse me, 6/6. Legendary dragon with flying and haste, and it cannot be countered. That's really important. You can pay 1 red and have Inferno of the Star Mount get +1/+0 till end of turn. When its power becomes 20 this way, it just deals 20 damage to any target. Which is pretty silly, you know. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can put like a Colossification on this and then pump it 1 time to just, 20 your opponent, which is pretty funny if you want to be a jank lord, and we all do. So that's the thing. It's a thing you can do. But there's a multitude of ways you can increase this thing's power without having to pump it, and then just pump it like once or twice and win that way. So that's cool. But also, just a fire breathing ability is fine too. You get through with this on the turn after you play it or something, and then suddenly you're dealing like 10 damage to your opponent, or 12 or whatever you got the mana for. It does have haste too, so the turn that you play it, it can go ahead and swing. It can't be countered, so screw your Solid Comings and Mystical Disputes and Disdainful Strokes and all that stuff. It's just, if you get to 6 mana, this hits the table with haste. So just really decent against all those control decks and whatnot. It's a dragon. It's on curve with like Goldspan, so imagine swinging with Goldspan on turn 5, making a treasure, guaranteeing that you get to this card, and then the next turn you play this, swing with Goldspan and this, and you've done 14 damage in the last couple of turns. So on hasty dudes, it's just really difficult to deal with. So I actually do kind of really like this guy. I think they pushed him just enough, even at 6 mana, which is often too much for Standard, depending on the card. Right? Alrund's Epiphany sees Standard play. Emergent Ultimatum sees play. I wonder why. It's because they're that powerful. And even though this is a step behind the 2 cards I've just named, it's still a really powerful card that if you do top deck it when you have over 6 mana, it can come down and just blow your opponent away. Just 8 haste on attacks or something. Just a really cool card that I actually will go ahead and call. Sees some Standard play at some point. We got 3 mythics to go till the end of the day, and I think they're all pretty sweet. And one of my favorites is a Zararack, Lord of Undeath. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 5/5 legendary zombie wizard. When it enters the battlefield, if you didn't complete Tomb of Annihilation, return a Zararack to its owner's hand venture into the dungeon. Whenever a Zararack attacks, for each... I like saying that, by the way. Whenever a Zararack attacks, for each opponent, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token unless the defending player sacrifices a creature. So this is really sweet. It's Lovestruck Beast stats, 3 mana for a 5/5. But it's not always going to come down and immediately block and then attack the next turn or anything. Sometimes it's just going to ETB venture and pop right back to your hand, which is, I guess, fine, But if you were on the other night's stream when I was talking about some of the spoilers that we saw on Saturday, then you may have noticed that I also did the top 5 cards I can't wait to brew with. And one of those cards was Tomb of Annihilation. I think it's probably the most playable of all the dungeons that we've seen. It takes the least amount of time to get through, and in the right aggro deck, it can really put a lot of pressure on your opponent. If they choose to lose a bunch of life to it, well, it basically lava axes them, and if it doesn't lava axe them, it's going to make them discard cards or sacrifice stuff. So I think in the right, probably black aggro deck or white aggro deck, then a card like Tomb of Annihilation can either add a whole bunch of damage to the table in just a couple of turns, or conversely, it can do a whole bunch of headachy stuff to the opponent. So I actually really like Tomb of Annihilation. It might be my favorite of these dungeons, and I think if any of them sees a ton of standard play, it might be Tomb. Well, this card plays really well with Tomb. It only really takes 3 ventures to complete Tomb if you're serious, 4 if you're not. So this actually starts attacking and blocking somewhat early in the game, depending on how quickly you can venture. And I like that. But, once it's down, it's also great. It doesn't have any real drawback once it's on the table. Lovestruck Beast has to have a 1/1 to attack. Now, this can attack and block and do whatever it wants anytime it wants to. And when it does so, it creates more value in the form of bodies. Unless your opponent wants to sack stuff. And if you've just been through Tomb of Annihilation, they might not want to sack too much stuff. So you just got to get guys. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, I feel like if they sack a creature rather than give you a 2/2, you actually kind of won that exchange. In most cases. So, I think this is a really sweet card just for Standard. But obviously, in Legacy, this works with Alarin in a really funky way. Alarin's one of my favorite cards of all time. I did a lot of broken stuff back in the day with Alarin and cards like Enduring Renewal. I tend to really like cards like this. Alarin, however, basically lets you play 3 mana creatures and under for free, right? So you can just play this for free, venture, play this for free, venture, play this for free, venture, play this for free, venture. That's pretty, that's pretty sick, So that means that you just get at least a couple of free ventures. You get to... If you don't play Tomb of Annihilation, though, now that I think about it, I hadn't thought about this yet, but if you don't play Tomb of Annihilation and you play the other 2 dungeons, you just kind of get to complete them infinitely. That's busted. Why didn't I think of that before? Yeah, if you play this, I was just thinking about Alarin and Tomb of Annihilation with this guy, but yeah, if you play any dungeon not called Tomb of Annihilation, you effectively get to complete them infinitely in Legacy, which might be worth setting up. Wow, actually. But the last couple of cards of the day are Planeswalkers, both Mythic Planeswalkers. Let's look at Mordenkainen here. This is 6 mana for a legendary 5 loyalty Planeswalker. You can +2 this to draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. Now, if you -2 it, you create a blue dog illusion creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. You can -10 Mordenkainen to exchange your hand and library, then shuffle. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. This is a sweet Planeswalker. It costs 6 mana, which is a lot. But, I kind of freaked out about Professor Onyx. That costs 6 mana, and this is probably better in some ways than Professor Onyx. It's not quite the win condition, I think, that Professor Onyx is, because, Onyx has Magecraft and a really just game-winning ultimate. Whereas this doesn't necessarily win the game immediately when it ultimates, but when it does ultimate, it's good. Especially if you have enough cards in your hand to keep playing Magic, because you have to exchange your hand in library. So if you only have 2 or 3 cards in your hand, then you only get a couple of turns. But with every card in your deck, save for a couple in your hand and a maximum hand size, you probably win. You probably win off of that. But it's the first couple of modes that I really like on this. The -2 to create a blue dog is actually kind of good. Even if you only have 2 cards in your hand, you're -2ing for a 4/4. If you have 3 cards in your hand, you -2 for a 6/6. If you have a full grip, you get a 14/14, so that can win the game, right? It's also not like a normal illusion, the dog. Also, it's a dog. Why is it a dog? I love that it is, though. I'm sure some D&D player will tell me that he's got some sort of dog companion he hangs out with, but I do like that this makes a dog. for no other reason than it did. I like dogs. But and some people are going to be like, what? You like cats? It's like, dude, I like animals. Animals are cool. I don't see why you would have love for one animal and a vendetta against another animal. Just like animals. Animals are cool. I like life forces. I like beings with life force bestowed into them. Anyway, except for some people. But anyway, the +2 is actually the best part of this. Draw 2, put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. So kind of a brainstormy kind of text there, right? Because you're not actually putting one of the cards that you drew back unless you only had, you just had 0 cards in your hand when you plus this. But if you had any number of cards in your hand, you're actually just putting the worst card from your hand on the bottom of your library. And, if you have Fabled Passage or something like that, then you can shuffle the card back in, so it's not such a harsh penalty to put stuff on the bottom of your library sometimes. But still, if you have a bad card in your hand, you'll put the worst card from your hand on the bottom of your library and draw the 2 effectively. So this is a draw 2, kind of. Not in terms of card advantage, but in terms of how many you get to see, and the fact that you can put bad cards back and keep the 2 good cards you drew is just really powerful. For 6 mana, that is an incredibly powerful ability. And the ability to protect itself is very strong too. So I like this Planeswalker a good bit. I say it's not as much of a win condition as Lily, but when you're making like 10 dogs, you can make 2 of these dogs and it's still alive if it didn't get attacked or anything. So I don't know, just a cool card. Protects itself well, draws cards very well, and those are the 2 things I want of a Planeswalker. Has a pretty game-winning ultimate, all things considered. That's not super hard to get to, and that's another thing I like out of a Planeswalker. So, they kind of pushed this as much as they could for 6 mana, and I think it probably sees some amount of play in the right control builds. But let's look at Grand Master of Flowers here. Kind of looks like a cross between Urtai from Stronghold and like James Holzhauer from Jeopardy and The Chase and all that. I see both of them in this card. But anyway, Grand Master of Flowers. I also really like this name. I see people making fun of this name. This name is dope. Screw you. I like this name. Grand Master of Flowers. Grandmaster Flash. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker whose type is Bahamut. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see that this is actually Bahamut? The whole time. As long as Grandmaster of Flowers has 7 or more loyalty counters, he's a 7/7 dragon god creature with flying and indestructible. So as long as he has 7 loyalty, he's Bahamut, basically. A 7/7 flying indestructible guy. You can +1 Grandmaster to have target creature without first strike, double strike, or vigilance not be able to attack or block until your next turn. So you get to detain a guy, basically, so long as he doesn't have the right keyword abilities. You get to detain a guy for +1. You can also +1 this, has no minus abilities. No minus abilities in this guy. You can +1 him, search your library and or graveyard for a card named Monk of the Open Hand, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you shuffle your library this way, or if you search your library this way, shuffle. So obviously we saw Monk a little bit earlier. And even though I'm not sure how great Monk's going to be at that point in the game, you slam this on turn 4, and then you search your library for a Monk that you can't play until the next turn. But I guess maybe you play it next turn alongside another card and it becomes a 2/2 or something. It's just like this second ability almost looks like one of those, pre-con Planeswalker abilities. Go get a creature that has kind of something to do with this guy and put it in your hand or put it into play. In this case, it's put it in your hand. But I still think altogether this is really good. If you're low on creatures on the board, then you get to go search up a creature every turn, or at least you get to do that 4 times. At the very least, maybe you can find a way to put a Monk back into your library somehow, and you go search it up again or something like that. So, you get to tutor for a creature every turn if you want to do that. Or you can also just detain a guy. So this dude protects himself really well. He goes and gets a creature to block, or he keeps the best thing on their side of the table from attacking it. So protects himself super well. And once he has 7 loyalty, he just is a giant dragon guy. It's not like an ultimate or an emblem or anything. He just is a giant dragon dude with indestructible, who effectively protects himself. I guess they can attack into him, but he can block for himself with indestructible. That's interesting, isn't it? In any case, it does take a bunch of turns to get this to the requisite loyalty to make it a huge guy, but Either way, I think that it does cool stuff the entire time it's in play. You know, detain a couple of guys or search up a couple of Monk of the Open Hands or whatever and play those out, play a couple other spells and build your monks. And then by the time you get to the late game, this guy can actually start attacking, and sometimes he'll just win the game. You know, he gets to 7 loyalty somehow or another. Maybe you have a way of proliferating and putting more counters on him. Maybe you've got a Vorinclex out when you play this, and suddenly he comes into play with 6 loyalty. And each, you know, plus ability gives him 2, so it will take far, far less time to get a 7/7 dragon out of him. There's just a lot of really cool things I think can be done with this, and I think this is a fairly strong planeswalker. Well, that is all the cards from Monday, and honestly, I really liked a lot of these cards today, like more than I have been liking the cards. They saved a lot of really good stuff for today, and I'm happy about that, but who knows what's on the horizon for tomorrow, which will be the last day of spoilers. Now, if you didn't see the spoilers from the weekend, or at least you didn't see me cover them, then go over to this web address at thetwitch.tv and check out our latest VOD. That's going to cover not only all of the cards that we saw over the weekend, and I think there's some really important stuff to cover. But not only that, but you'll also see the 5 cards that I want to brew with the most from the set so far. So a lot of cool content over there. Go check out the Twitch, and also check us out on Patreon, where you can support the channel for $1 a month and vote on what decks and stuff we do once we actually get into Adventures Standards, or Adventures in Forgotten Realms Standard. We're already in Adventure Standard, aren't we? Once we get to Forgotten Realms Standard, you'll be able to choose what decks we do. And obviously, you can follow me on Twitter, too, if you want to. But aside from that, I guess I'm done for this one. And I've got a lot of editing to do. So I should probably do that. Just let me know how you felt about all of these takes and all of these cards. You know, is the White Planeswalker not as good as I want it to be? Possibly. Is Skeletal Swarming okay? Is it a fine card? I'm not sure, but it's probably bad. But let me know if that's wrong down there in the comments section. And aside from that, just share the video around so more people get spoiler action, subscribe, and hit the bell for the notifications, because I've recently been told that you're not getting the notifications. You're not getting the notifications if you're subbed, which sucks. Basically, I think YouTube's trying to erase me, so don't let that happen. Make sure you share the video around and hit the bell for the notifications to make sure that YouTube actually tells you when I upload videos. You would think subscribing would do that, but apparently it's a 2-step process. Hit the bell for the notifications. But aside from that, I'm done. So I guess I'll see y'all tomorrow. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.